So the first thing we learned about in Module 3 is the demographic transition model. I was surprised the first video talked about how poverty has halved in recent years. I don't know, I just thought that there was more people. I don't know why I thought there was less. It makes sense. It was just surprising. I think poverty is more of a public thing and that we're trying to help fix it and to use there's more awareness of it, but that awareness has brought less of it. I was also surprised by the epidemiological transition model because it's supposed to say the next phase is the reemergence of epidemics, and I think that I would be shocked if that happened because we have so much better technology and so much newer technology, which you can also see when it talks about the video how will society change as population ages, which talks about people getting older and how we have a larger group. I think that just in general, like, we won't really go back to that pandemic phase because that was like when people were dying more frequently because of diseases and things, and we didn't have the technology to save people. Now we have that technology, and it's also allowing people to get older. If there is a reemergence, I do think this might be a little like depressing, but I think that that would fix a lot of the issues that we have with the where there's so many older people, and we're going to have this shift of where people are going to be more reliant on, or elderly people are going to need more support, because if there's a pandemic, some of the first people to go would be the elderly. I know it's dark, but that's just what I see from a logical standpoint if that were to happen, which I don't think it would. Okay, switching focus, talking about the college town resource. I thought it was a very interesting resource because it makes it sound really sad and depressing and like, oh, all these towns, they're all dying off. But I just think that's part of like how a community grows. Like, that's gonna happen and it's not shocking. Like, I see the flip side of it a lot. I work in construction, so I'm seeing where like there are more young people entering the field and they're coming straight from high school, and they make it out to be this horrible thing in this resource. Not horrible thing, but like, oh, no one wants to go to college anymore. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously I'm in college and I am getting an education from it, but I think there's like this switch that's happening in society where people are becoming less reliant on college, and I think that's a good thing because I think we need more people just working than we need people in like the education field, which and it's kind of, to me, I have like a quote I'm bringing from an outside resource. It's J. Michael Hopf. He says, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times, and that cycle. And I think that this is kind of where we're in that switch where it's harder times are creating strong men in the sense, or women. Men are women, but we're in that switch, and so that's why we're getting people less focused on college, because we need like harder manual labor more than we need easy sit down 9-to-5 jobs. So another thing that I saw that involved construction is when I was talking about the fear in the city. That chapter talks about decaying buildings. I was actually talking about this. Well, I was getting lectured on this earlier today because I went to a construction site that's a high school being renovated, and one of the things they had to worry about was the structural integrity of the building. And I think that that's like something you see in a lot of construction, especially because we're trying to build new stuff, and when you're doing that, it creates a lot of disturbance, which is a high risk for the people around us. And so things like structural engineers are becoming more and more important because as we continue to build, there's more buildings we're building around, and that just creates more danger for everybody around. And it's harder because you've got people living and actively in the buildings that are surrounding the construction. Another thing it talked about is fire, which is like people's like a big fear in cities, which makes sense in the sense of like when I'm at work, a lot of the things we see is a lot of building codes strictly based for if a fire happens. It's crazy how much focus you have on something that you don't even expect to happen. So like you have like fire stopping every floor, like there's a fire stop to stop it so that if there is a fire, it only is on that level. And you have an entire sprinkler system, which is a very expensive and difficult system to install, which is purely if there is a fire, which isn't expected to happen. Like, a ton of money goes into buildings just for if a fire happens, which I think is very interesting. Another thing, so talking about the weak men quotes are, one of the things that it kind of reminded me of was how that mice video was talking about using Amazon and how we're a very convenience living society now, and we can have or we live in these suburbs and we don't have to worry about living in the city because we have Amazon and we have a lot of easier things and a lot of technology. And then technology as well, seeing that AI video, just speaking on technology, I didn't like that one. It made me uncomfortable because I didn't like how they were talking as if they were human. They said a quote, we're not just robots, right? Thank goodness for that, which was such a weird quote because they are robots. I didn't like that. I didn't like any of that video. Just it made me uncomfortable how human-like they were trying to seem when it's AI. And then that video talks about Georg Simmels, and so does the Modular Man, which kind of just talks about how like social interactions are less and less and they're less frequent and they're less important. One of the things it talks about is like people who move a lot, and I think a good example of how that works is like military men, where you see that they're French, like what they're looking for a lot of times, I forget how people say it, but it's like they're either looking for a really quick hookup or like someone to marry, because they're not here long enough to create lasting friendships. I think that kind of just goes for a lot of society today, where we have a lot of like hookup culture because relationships don't last as long as they used to. And then moving on from that, so white flight, housing segregation, and redlining, and then the suburbanization in the United States. I'm kind of gonna group them together. So I have the redlining I didn't know about. I was kind of surprised by that. I guess it makes sense. I just didn't realize that that's why there's so many of the way, like, that cities are set up the way they are nowadays. I didn't realize that. I also think so that the short video that talked about, it was the white flight video, and how it talked about how they moved into the city and then the white people started moving out. I question whether it's more of because of the suburbia and that, like, the American dream that suburbanation video talks about, because I would assume that's, obviously I think black people moving in probably did make them uncomfortable, just because of, I mean, back then people were racist and everything. But that was my assumption as to why that was there. And I also think that part of it is, like, what I was looking at was that the Latin American futurism video and how they embrace their culture. I think that's where we should head more as a society, is embracing our culture and growing with that, and incorporating it in our future, if that makes any sense. And that is my opinion on Module 3.